Chicago's most ruthless syndicate boss thought he was just humiliating a penniless waitress when he ordered a $30,000 vintage in an obscure, elite Italian dialect. He expected terrified silence. Instead, his world freezes when she answers back flawlessly, wielding the exact aristocratic accent of his deadliest, long-dead rival. Silverware clinked against fine porcelain beneath the amber chandeliers of Il Lusso, River North's most exclusive dining fortress. For Claire Miller, a double shift meant aching feet and the suffocating anxiety of staying invisible. She adjusted her starched collar and black apron, her crooked name tag bearing a lie she had lived for 5 agonizing years. At exactly 8 o'clock, the mahogany doors were parted by 2 men in tailored suits radiating understated violence. The dining room's ambient chatter instantly died. Bernard, the usually unflappable maître d', swallowed his pride and sprinted to the entrance. Alessandro Cavalli had arrived. He moved with the lazy, predatory grace of a man who owned not just the building, but the judges and politicians dining within it. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that draped flawlessly over his broad shoulders, Alessandro was a portrait of lethal elegance. The heavy platinum Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime on his left wrist caught the chandelier's light, a timepiece worth more than the entire restaurant's inventory. His features were striking, carved from Roman marble, but his eyes were a terrifying shade of obsidian, devoid of warmth or mercy. He was the undisputed head of the Cavalli Syndicate, controlling the Midwest's underground shipping routes with an iron fist wrapped in velvet. Bernard frantically ushered Alessandro and his 3 lieutenants to table 7, the secluded corner booth universally understood to be reserved for the city's apex predators. Claire stood by the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew the golden rule of Il Lusso. When the Cavalli family dines, you do not make eye contact, you do not linger, and you absolutely do not make a mistake. "Claire!" Bernard hissed, materializing beside her and gripping her arm with clammy fingers. "Take their table. Francois is too nervous. He'll drop something. Just get their drink orders and get away. Do not speak unless spoken to." Claire nodded tersely, grabbing a leather-bound wine ledger. She approached table 7 with practiced, silent steps, keeping her gaze respectfully lowered to the crisp white tablecloth. The men were discussing import yields at the port of Chicago, their voices low, rumbling with casual authority. "Good evening, gentlemen," Claire murmured, her voice soft but steady. "May I begin your service with some sparkling water, or perhaps a selection from our cellar?" Alessandro didn't even look up from his phone. One of his lieutenants, a burly man with a scar slicing through his right eyebrow, sneered. "Just bring us the reserve list, sweetheart, and make it quick." Alessandro finally raised his head. His dark eyes swept over Claire, taking in her fraying cuffs, the pale exhaustion of her face, and the cheap, scuffed orthopedic shoes she wore. He recognized desperation when he saw it. To him, she was a peasant, a localized piece of the scenery meant to serve and disappear. A cruel, playful smirk touched the corner of his mouth. He decided to test the establishment's vaunted, world-class service, while simultaneously putting the lowly staff in their place. Leaning back against the plush leather booth, Alessandro spoke. He didn't use English. He didn't even use standard, conversational Italian. He used a hyper-specific, archaic dialect of aristocratic Sicilian, a language spoken only by the old-blood Mafia families of Palermo, a dialect designed centuries ago to keep secrets from the authorities and the lower classes. "Portami un gaggia barbaresco sori San Lorenzo," Alessandro commanded smoothly, the syllables rolling off his tongue with venomous elegance. L'annata 2015. E assicurati che i bicchieri siano immacolati. Non tollero la sporcizia, specialmente da una cameriera che sembra essere appena uscita dai bassifondi. Sbrigati, ragazzina. Bring me a Gaggia Barbaresco, Sori San Lorenzo, the 2015 vintage, and ensure the glasses are immaculate. I do not tolerate filth, especially from a waitress who looks like she just crawled out of the slums. Hurry up, little girl. The lieutenants chuckled, a low, menacing sound. They knew the dialect well enough to catch the insult. They waited for the inevitable stammering, the flushed cheeks, the panicked apology of an ignorant American waitress who would have to beg for a translation. Claire stood perfectly still. For a terrifying, suspended second, the walls of the Chicago restaurant melted away. The scent of roasted garlic and truffle oil vanished, replaced by the phantom smell of sea salt, gunpowder, and blooming lemon groves. The dialect hit her like a physical blow to the chest. It was the language of her childhood, the language spoken in the walled estates of Palermo, the language her father spoke right before the Cavalli family's hitmen breached their compound gates 5 years ago. A fiery, reckless indignation ignited in Claire's veins, burning away 5 years of carefully cultivated meekness. She lifted her chin, her eyes locking directly onto Alessandro's obsidian gaze. The submissive slouch evaporated from her posture, replaced by a spine of steel. When she spoke, her voice was not a soft murmur. It was a perfectly pitched, crystalline replication of the exact same aristocratic Sicilian dialect, laced with an icy disdain that made the air temperature drop. Un'ottima scelta, signore, Claire replied, her pronunciation flawless, carrying the undeniable, haughty cadence of high-born Cosa Nostra royalty. Tuttavia, il Sori San Lorenzo del 2015 ha tannini estremamente aggressivi in questo momento. Richiede un palato raffinato e una decantazione di almeno 2 ore per ammorbidire la sua arroganza. Le suggerisco il 2014. È più equilibrato. E per quanto riguarda la pulizia, le assicuro che l'unico elemento sgradevole in questa stanza non è il mio grembiule. An excellent choice, sir. However, the 2015 Sori San Lorenzo has extremely aggressive tannins right now. It requires a refined palate and a decanting of at least 2 hours to soften its arrogance. I suggest the 2014. It is more balanced. And as for cleanliness, I assure you the only unpleasant element in this room is not my apron. Dead silence slammed into table 7. The lieutenant with the scar choked on the bread he was eating. The other 2 men instinctively reached toward the inside lapels of their jackets. Alessandro Cavalli completely froze. The playful cruelty vanished from his face, replaced by a shock so profound it looked as though he had just been struck by lightning. His eyes widened, scanning her face, peering past the cheap makeup and the dull brown hair dye. He heard the cadence. He recognized the specific regional inflection. That dialect was virtually extinct, wiped out in the Sicilian purges. The only people who spoke it like that were the D'Amico family, and the D'Amico family was entirely dead. "Who are you?" Alessandro demanded, his voice dropping to a lethal, barely audible whisper in English. The velvet was gone. Only the iron remained. Claire realized her fatal mistake the moment the words left her mouth. Her survival instinct, dormant for half a decade, screamed at her. She immediately dropped her gaze, hunching her shoulders, trying to stuff the aristocratic ghost back into the bottle. I'm Claire, sir," she stammered in English, forcing a Midwestern accent, her hands shaking violently as she gripped the wine ledger. "I learned a little Italian from my grandfather. I'm sorry if I misunderstood your order. I will get the sommelier." Before Alessandro could reach across the table and grab her wrist, Claire spun on her heel and practically fled toward the kitchen, leaving the most dangerous man in Chicago staring at her retreating back, a storm of dark, terrifying realization brewing in his eyes. The penthouse suite of the St. Regis Chicago offered a panoramic, glittering view of Lake Michigan, but Alessandro Cavalli had his back to the floor-to-ceiling windows. He sat at a massive slab of Nero Marchina marble that served as his desk, a glass of Macallan 25 untouched in front of him. His most trusted enforcer and intelligence gatherer, Dominic, stood on the opposite side of the desk, flipping through a thin manila folder. Dominic was a ghost of a man, thin and pale, but possessed a terrifying intellect when it came to digging up buried secrets. "Claire Miller," Dominic said flatly, tossing the folder onto the marble. Age 24, resides in a crumbling third-floor walk-up in Pilsen, pays rent in cash. Credit score is non-existent. The social security number she's using is legitimate, but it was issued to a girl who died of leukemia in rural Ohio 20 years ago. Claire Miller didn't exist until exactly 5 years and 2 months ago. Alessandro steepled his fingers, the Patek Philippe glinting in the low light. 5 years and 2 months, the exact timeline of the Palermo massacre. "Boss," Dominic said cautiously, "you know as well as I do that the D'Amico compound was leveled. Don Antonio, his wife, his sons, all confirmed dead. The Americans and the local authorities pulled the bodies from the ash." "Not all of them," Alessandro murmured, his mind replaying the scene at Il Lusso on a continuous, agonizing loop. "Don Antonio had a daughter, Caterina. She was away at boarding school in Switzerland. The official story is that the rival hit squad tracked her train and threw her from the Alps over the Viaduc de la Baie de Clarence. They found her luggage, her coat, and blood on the tracks, but they never found the body. You think a Mafia princess survived a professional hit, crossed the Atlantic, and has been serving truffles to tourists in River North?" Dominic raised an eyebrow. "She corrected my pronunciation of a dead language, Dominic," Alessandro said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with an intense, dangerous energy. "She didn't just speak it. She spoke it with the haughty, infuriating superiority that only Antonio D'Amico possessed. She mocked me. A waitress in a dirty apron looked me in the eye and mocked me in my ancestors' tongue." Alessandro stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "We didn't order the hit on the D'Amicos, Dominic. The commission blamed us, heavily sanctioned us, but we were framed by the Rossi faction. If Caterina D'Amico is alive, she is the sole legitimate heir to a massive European shipping empire that is currently being squatted on by our enemies. And more importantly," Alessandro's eyes darkened, "she thinks I killed her family. What's the play, boss? Get the car. We are going to Pilsen." 10 miles away, panic was a physical taste in Claire's mouth, copper and ash. She tore through her tiny, drafty apartment, abandoning everything that couldn't fit into a single duffel bag. The cheap furniture, the thrift store clothes, the fake nursing degree on the wall, all of it meant nothing now. She had broken the first rule of hiding: never show your teeth. She knelt on the scuffed hardwood floor beneath her radiator, prying up a loose board with a butter knife. From the dark cavity, she pulled out a vacuum-sealed plastic bag. Inside was a stack of euro notes, a genuine Portuguese passport bearing the name Isabella Silva, and a heavy, cold piece of forged steel, a vintage Beretta 92 FS. It had been her father's backup piece. The familiar weight of the weapon in her hand brought a terrifying comfort. She was no longer Claire Miller. She was Caterina D'Amico, and she was a dead woman walking. She zipped the duffel bag, shoved the beretta into the waistband of her jeans, and threw on a heavy, oversized coat to obscure her figure. She needed to get to O'Hare International Airport. A red-eye flight on American Airlines to Lisbon was leaving in 3 hours. She would disappear into the labyrinth of Europe. Katerina opened the deadbolt of her apartment door and pulled it open, stepping out into the dim, flickering fluorescent light of the hallway. She slammed face first into a wall of solid muscle. A large, scarred hand clamped over her mouth, while another expertly pinned her right arm to her side before she could even reach for the beretta. She thrashed wildly, driven by pure adrenaline, but the grip was absolute. "Do not scream," a low, smooth voice echoed in the cramped hallway. The man holding her stepped back slightly, allowing her to see. Standing 5 feet away, illuminated by a failing overhead bulb, was Alessandro Cavalli. He looked entirely out of place in the grimy Pilsen corridor, his Brioni suit radiating expensive authority. Dominic stood silently behind him, blocking the stairwell. Alessandro stepped closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers, seeing right through the panic. "Going somewhere, Principessa?" Alessandro asked softly. Katerina stopped struggling. The sheer audacity of the man standing before her, the man she believed had slaughtered her family, ignited a rage so profound it burned away her fear. She yanked her arm free, and although she couldn't reach her gun, she stood her ground, her eyes blazing with an ancient, inherited fire. "Get out of my way, Cavalli!" She spat in perfect, unaccented English, dropping the Midwestern facade entirely. "Or finish the job your butchers started 5 years ago right here." Alessandro didn't flinch at the venom in her voice. Instead, a strange, almost impressed flicker crossed his stoic features. He reached out slowly, his fingertips lightly brushing the collar of her cheap coat. Katerina jerked back as if burned. "If I wanted you dead, Katerina," Alessandro said quietly, using her real name for the first time, "you would have been dead before you served the appetizers. I am not here to kill you. I am here to tell you that everything you believe about your family's death is a lie. And if you walk down those stairs right now, the people who actually killed them, the people who are currently hunting you, will find you before you even reach the tarmac at O'Hare." Katerina's heart hammered against her ribs. "You're a liar. You ordered the hit." "Did I?" Alessandro tilted his head. "Then why am I standing in a roach-infested hallway, offering the heir to the D'Amico throne a way to burn our mutual enemies to the ground?" He extended his hand toward her, palm open. "The choice is yours, Katerina. Run and die tired in some European alley, or come with me, and we take back what is ours." The silence inside the armor-plated Maybach Pullman was heavier than the Chicago winter, raging outside the tinted glass. Katerina sat rigidly against the opulent leather, her hand resting near the waistband of her coat, where the cold steel of the beretta waited. Alessandro sat opposite her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes never leaving her face. He was studying her, peeling back the layers of the exhausted waitress to find the aristocratic heiress buried beneath. "You have been hiding in plain sight," Alessandro said softly, the hum of the engine barely registering. "Pilsen is a strategic choice, close enough to the city's pulse to vanish in the crowd, yet far enough from the elite circles that you'd never bump into a ghost from your past." "Until one walked into the restaurant where I work to pay my rent," Katerina replied, her voice laced with frost. "Tell me about the hit, Cavalli. You claim you didn't order it. Then who leveled my home?" Alessandro poured 2 glasses of sparkling water from the car's built-in console, offering her one. She ignored it. He took a sip, his expression turning grim. The commission needed a scapegoat. The Midwest territories were expanding too fast under my father, and the Rossi faction in New York wanted our shipping routes. Vincenzo Rossi orchestrated the Palermo massacre. He knew Don Antonio was unyielding. But Rossi couldn't breach your family's estate alone. He had help from the inside. Caterina's breath hitched. Impossible. My father's men were loyal to the blood. Men are loyal to blood until gold speaks louder, Alessandro countered, pulling a digital tablet from his briefcase and tossing it onto the seat beside her. Open it. With trembling fingers, Caterina tapped the screen. It displayed a series of encrypted wire transfers dated 3 days before the massacre. The recipient account was offshore, but the routing numbers traced back to a shell corporation in Geneva. The name on the establishing documents made her stomach violently hollow out. Donato Greco, her father's consigliere, her godfather. Donato, she whispered, the name tasting like ash. He sold the security codes. He let them in. He did, Alessandro confirmed. And in return, Vincenzo Rossi handed him the reins to the D'Amico Empire. Donato now controls the Palermo ports, but he operates as a puppet for New York. For 5 years, I have been fighting a shadow war against the Rossis, bleeding resources, because they used your family's blood to unite the East Coast against me. Caterina looked up from the glowing screen, her eyes locking onto Alessandro's. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal threatened to break her, but the D'Amico pride, forged over centuries, refused to crack in front of a rival boss. Why bring me into this? If you know Rossi and Donato are aligned, why not just kill them? Because an assassination would just create a power vacuum, Alessandro explained, leaning forward, the ambient streetlights illuminating the sharp, ruthless angles of his face. I don't just want them dead, Caterina. I want their legitimacy destroyed. The European families only follow Donato because they believe the D'Amico bloodline is extinct. If they see you, the true heir, standing tall and breathing, Donato's empire will collapse overnight. His men will turn on him for the treachery. The Rossis will lose their foothold. And in exchange? Caterina asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You get to absorb my family's territory? Alessandro's lips curved into a slow, appreciative smile. She was sharp. She was exactly the weapon he needed. In exchange, we form an alliance. The Chicago Syndicate and the Palermo faction, united. We split the global shipping lanes down the middle, equal partners. Caterina let out a bitter laugh. The lion doesn't partner with the lamb, Cavalli. You are no lamb, Principessa, Alessandro murmured, his gaze dropping momentarily to the outline of the gun beneath her coat. You are a wolf who has been forced to eat scraps. I am offering you the entire feast. The Maybach slowed, turning off the main highway and passing through a pair of massive, wrought-iron gates. They drove up a winding, snow-covered driveway, lined with ancient oaks, finally stopping before a sprawling, modern fortress of glass and stone in Highland Park. This is my personal estate, Alessandro said, as the driver opened the door. You are safe here. No one knows this location except my inner circle. Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, we plan how to resurrect a ghost. Caterina stepped out into the freezing wind, pulling her cheap coat tight. She looked at the towering mansion, then at the man standing beside her. He was the devil, perhaps, but right now, the devil was the only one offering her a sword to strike down the demons who had slaughtered her family. All right, Alessandro, Caterina said, using his first name, her aristocratic accent bleeding back into her English. But understand this. I am not a pawn. If you cross me, I won't just walk away. I will burn your house to the ground with you inside it. Alessandro looked down at her. The fierce, unyielding fire in her eyes, sparking something entirely unexpected within his dark, methodical soul. It wasn't just respect. It was an intoxicating, dangerous obsession. "I would expect nothing less," he whispered. 2 weeks later, the opulent ballroom of the historic Drake Hotel was transformed into a den of velvet-draped vipers. The Commission, the ruling body of the continent's most powerful crime families, had gathered under the guise of an elite charity auction. Men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in stolen diamonds drank vintage champagne, their polite smiles masking centuries of blood feuds. At the center of the room stood Vincenzo Rossi, a silver-haired shark from New York, holding court. Beside him, looking older but comfortably steeped in stolen wealth, was Donato Greco. The heavy, gilded double doors of the ballroom suddenly groaned open, silencing the string quartet playing in the corner. The ambient chatter died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, tense vacuum. Alessandro Cavalli stood in the doorway, exuding a terrifying, quiet power. But it was the woman on his arm that caused the collective heart of the underworld to stop beating. Caterina was no longer the exhausted waitress from Il Lusso. She was a terrifying vision of vengeance wrapped in haute couture. She wore a floor-length, blood-red velvet gown that hugged her curves and pooled at her feet, leaving her shoulders bare. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate, elegant style, exposing a collarbone adorned with a flawless, teardrop diamond necklace. Her mother's necklace, which Alessandro had painstakingly tracked down and purchased back from the black market. She walked with the predatory grace of a queen returning to claim her stolen throne. Her eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the room, pausing on Donato Greco. The older man physically recoiled, the color draining from his face as if he had just seen an apparition. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling hand, shattering against the marble floor. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "Good evening, gentlemen," Alessandro projected, his voice smooth and carrying across the ballroom. "I apologize for the late arrival, but my fiancé required a moment to retrieve a family heirloom." Fiancé. The word rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. It was a lie, a tactical masterstroke designed by Alessandro to legitimize their immediate alliance and make Caterina untouchable by commission rules. But the possessive way his hand rested on the small of her back made Caterina's skin flush with very real heat. Caterina stepped forward, leaving Alessandro's side. She glided across the floor until she stood mere feet away from the trembling Donato and the furious Vincenzo Rossi. "Hello, Godfather," Caterina said softly, her voice carrying the unmistakable, aristocratic lilt of the D'Amico bloodline. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her presence was loud enough. "Caterina," Donato stammered, stepping back, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "It cannot be. You died in Switzerland." "I survived, Donato," she corrected, her voice turning to ice. "I survived the fall, I survived the cold, and I survived the 5 years of poverty you condemned me to when you sold my father's life to New York." Murmurs erupted across the ballroom. The European bosses, men who had sworn fealty to the D'Amico name for generations, began to step forward, their eyes narrowing at Donato. "This is a trick!" Vincenzo Rossi barked, stepping in front of Donato, his face flushed with rage. "Cavalli found a look-alike, a street rat to play dress-up and steal our territories." Caterina didn't flinch. She turned her gaze to a nearby service cart, where a terrified sommelier was frozen mid-pour. She elegantly plucked a bottle from the cart. It was a 2014 Gaja Barbaresco. She turned back to Rossi, holding the bottle by the neck. Pensi che io sia un impostore, Vincenzo? Caterina spoke, the archaic, hyper-specific Sicilian dialect slicing through the air like a razor. It was the absolute proof, the dialect of the Palermo elite, taught only behind the closed doors of the D'Amico estate. Mio padre ti considerava un cane senza pedigree. Aveva ragione. Puzzi ancora di strada. Non importa quanti abiti su misura compri. Do you think I am an imposter, Vincenzo? My father considered you a dog without a pedigree. He was right. You still reek of the street, no matter how many bespoke suits you buy. The European bosses instantly recognized the dialect. The arrogant, flawless cadence was a fingerprint. Knives were quietly drawn. Silencers were screwed onto barrels in the shadows of the room. The tide had turned in an instant. Donato's illegitimate reign was over. Rossi, realizing he was outplayed and surrounded, lunged forward, reaching for the weapon inside his tuxedo jacket. He never made it. Alessandro moved with terrifying speed, his arm extending in a blur. A suppressed thwip sounded, and Vincenzo Rossi dropped to his knees, a crimson blossom blooming on the crisp white of his tuxedo shirt. The New York boss collapsed onto the marble floor, dead before he hit the ground. Pandemonium did not break out. Instead, a lethal, disciplined stillness washed over the room as Dominic and a dozen of Cavalli's heavily armed men stepped from the shadows, securing the perimeter. Donato Greco fell to his knees, weeping, his hands clasped in front of him. Caterina, Principessa, please, spare me. I was forced. They threatened my family. Caterina looked down at the man who had bounced her on his knee, the man who had sold her family for port access. The waitress who used to shrink away from loud customers was gone forever. The mob boss had awakened. She handed the bottle of Barbaresco to Alessandro without breaking eye contact with the traitor. You have no family, Donato, Caterina said softly. She stepped back, turning her back on him completely. She looked at Alessandro, nodding once. Alessandro raised his weapon. A second suppressed shot echoed through the ballroom, and Donato Greco's weeping abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was absolute. The remaining bosses of the commission looked at the bodies on the floor, then up at the new rulers of the underworld, Alessandro Cavalli, the lethal king of the Midwest, and Caterina D'Amico, the resurrected queen of the European Empire. Alessandro poured the 2014 Barbaresco, handing a glass to Caterina. His obsidian eyes locked onto hers, burning with possessive triumph. Their alliance had long surpassed mere business. The spark from that dingy hallway was now a raging inferno. To the 2014 vintage, Alessandro murmured, a faint smile on his lips. Perfectly balanced. Diamonds glinting under the chandelier, Caterina raised her glass. She tasted the dark wine, her gaze anchored to the man who had pulled her from the ashes. And completely ruthless, she replied. Together they drank to their new empire as the blood of their enemies cooled on the marble beneath them. Did the fiery return of the D'Amico heiress and her dangerous alliance with Chicago's most lethal boss keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this tale of betrayal, power, and unexpected Mafia romance, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories. Who will they conquer next?